Stop being so sensitive.
You're such a weirdo.
Just try harder. You just need to pray. It could be worse. It's all in your head. Other people have problems too. Why can't you just be happy?
The idea of mental health kind of was seen as unfit for society or unfit for success.
And that's always been a struggle for me growing up.
I didn't feel safe in my home.
It was this big secret that I couldn't tell.
I just think growing up it was really awkward to talk about it.
I just wanted the pain to stop.
To be honest, it's scary out here.
There are multiple reasons why people don't end up getting help for their mental health. Some say it's because of high costs, a shortage of providers, a lack of resources. But you know what the most important one is? Stigma. We hear stigma everywhere. We need to reduce stigma, we need to reduce stigma. But what exactly is it? Experts say that mental health stigma is when people view others negatively, particularly those who have mental illnesses. Are you guilty of it? What we explore is this stigma and what mental health advocates are doing to break it, because it seems to be the reason why people are choosing to fight battles on their own, or even not fight at all.
So there is stigma, whether it's from your community, your family, or your own self, like you feel, I'm better than this, I can overcome this. I was working at a church and I was about to lose my job. I was about to lose my job because of budget cuts. I didn't know what was gonna happen. My kid's depressed, I'm depressed. And I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Kumi McDonald was 9 years old when she experienced her first anxiety attack. Brought up by an immigrant family, she was told to brush it off.
I was taught in my own culture, in my own society, to just keep your head down, do well in school, right? Succeed, you know, don't air out your dirty laundry, you know. And I felt like as a young person, I wasn't able to have a safe place to vocalize my struggles. There wasn't a place where I could open up and say, hey, I'm struggling, I need help.
Kumi suffered with depression and anxiety for years.
When I was a young adult in college, maybe I did a little therapy, but really didn't get help until I was in my late 30s, when I had my third child, and I had, again, postpartum depression, but it was a little worse than the first two because now I'm a mom of 3 and the stress load and all of that. So that's when I first got help, and I realized, wow, it didn't have to be so hard.
Kumi is now the executive director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Hawaii, otherwise known as NAMI.
So it's not a job for me, it's a calling. It's something that I'm passionate about.
When I was 15, I suffered through extreme bullying. You know, it was online, it was also in person, and through this bullying, it caused me to go through this severe depression.
Adriana Saragosa was a student at James Campbell High School when she reached her tipping point.
I remember trying to reach out to people. You know, I tried to reach out to my family on certain occasions, but because they don't really understand the depression, to them it's get over it. You're being dramatic. How could you possibly be sad when somebody has it worse? I had posted a quote online that said, be the good in the world where there isn't any. Somebody around me in my school had reposted it and said, well, I think you should kill yourself. And it got 500 retweets from kids all around the island my age, people I've never met, people who I thought were my friends. And so with that, I was extremely upset. And that triggered me to say, well, I must be a failure, nobody likes me. So being in that mentality and that mindset, I wanted to end my life, not because I wanted to die, but because I wanted to stop hurting.
Through therapy and months of inner reflection, Adriana was able to find hope again. She's now a speaker under NAMI Hawaii's End the Silence campaign.
I was very ashamed of who I was before, but now I'm not, because this is who I am, and I've grown through everything that was sent to destroy me. I've overcome it. And so with that, I feel victorious in who I am. I use my time to talk to students in the schools of Hawaii and just share my story in hopes that somebody who feels the same way I felt years ago is sitting there and says, wow, maybe my life can get better. Maybe I can continue to keep going for just one more day.
See, my voice and my coughing is not better. So
I was seeing a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and I kept saying that I thought that I had dementia because I couldn't remember anything. And then that also led to depression, deep depression. Like I would wake up in the morning crying, I'd go to sleep crying.
Meet Angela Keene. You may have seen her as KGMB's former anchor.
I'm Angela Keene reporting for KGMB 9 Healthline. Back to you.
The face of Hawaii quarantine kapu breakers, or more recently in an article focused on brain treatments for long-haul COVID. Amid her long list of accolades and achievements was a long battle with severe depression and anxiety.
I mean, depressed people are probably some of the happiest people you'll meet on the exterior. So for me, I had a lot of makeup on, I had wonderful clothes, I looked presentable, I was seemingly happy-go-lucky on the outside, and on the inside I was really crumbling away mentally. And I told my my psych doc, I told him that I couldn't do it anymore, and I was kind of ready to jump off of a building, and I don't believe in suicide.
She tried everything to keep her head above water.
I tried vagus nerve stimulation, which is a device that you can put, on your body to help stimulate your vagus nerve. What other things? I tried supplements like peptides and brain peptides and different non-prescriptive things to help.
But what gave her hope was a brain treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation, and Hanai's son who checked in on her daily.
Just want to check in and let you know that I'm doing great.
Angela was chosen to be this year's honorary chair for NAMI Walks Hawaii.
Well, I'm just floored. I think that that's a time when we can come together and be a team and collaborate and talk about, our challenges that we face, and to be open about it and to be vocal about it so that we can fight for those who aren't able to speak up.
Advocates like Kumi, Adriana, and Angela all have one resounding message. You are not alone. Could you tell me what is mental health stigma and how does it differ from discrimination?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, right? Like we often hear about stigma, and stigma is really those stereotypes and the belief systems, whereas discrimination is when you act on stigma, when you act on those stereotypes. Discrimination is illegal. Stigma is not. What happens if you ask for help and now we move into that discrimination and someone says, you don't need help, that's normal. Things that we see as a result of that are not getting treatment.
We're really surrounded by this keep it quiet, culture.
One time I was at a middle school and I was giving a presentation in a cafeteria, and I had said, oh, my mom's diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And really loudly in the crowd, a child was like, ha ha! And I was terrified and wanted to run away.
There's that negative stigma where it's like, you're weak, like you can just work through this. Like they would say, pray it away, you aren't feeling that, you aren't, you know, this is weakness, this is the devil getting to you. And I kind of gaslight myself in a way to be like, you're not feeling that, you're okay, just battle through it. It took me a really long time to seek out help or even get a diagnosis.
It's easy to say, oh, just pray, everything will be better. When I first got diagnosed with depression and when I first started feeling suicidal, that's when they were really against it because they didn't want to have to be seen as the parents with a child who are mentally ill, because that's a reflection on them and it'll make them feel like they're bad parents.
Can you recall a time when somebody said something to you that made you feel like, okay, maybe I shouldn't talk about my mental health? Could you recall what they said, how it made you feel?
Growing up in an Asian household, you get that a lot with your family, unfortunately. So I remember opening up to my mom one time about how I was not feeling too well. And she said, I just have to be happy, I can't be negative. I compared myself to a lot of people, like this person's not sad about this situation or this person's not worked up about it. So I shouldn't be either, like I'm just overreacting, it's a me problem.
Boys suffer with mental illness in our state as well, but they're told to be a man, to man up. You don't deserve, you can't feel that way because you're a boy.
Like, it's hard for them to just be raw and be vulnerable.
I knew that mental health was always linked to, as my faith wasn't strong enough. That's what I always hear growing up. And I always thought that I wasn't devoted enough.
I worked also in bullying prevention with youth, and I would say, you know, where do you get, who's the biggest bully? How do you identify that? What is the one that hurts the most? And they say, I am. Like, what?
Oftentimes, if you talk about your mental illness, then you might not get the promotion that you deserve, right? Or you may be looked down on or not included in a project because somebody might go, well, she's depressed, so we don't want to include her. So there's that type of stigma. Sometimes the whole society or schools or churches or organizations want you to keep your head down, be a good worker, don't cause trouble, or they look at you less than if you say you have depression because they think you're lazy or you're not responsible, but that is far from truth.
I was in the parking lot of a Safeway and I was on the phone with my psychiatrist saying how much I was not in a good mental state and that I think I needed to go and commit myself, and he was on the phone with me trying to get me to go somewhere else because I was a teacher at the time. I was teaching special education and he was very afraid of how I would be stigmatized for seeking treatment.
"95% of people with mental illness are never violent." That's actually very similar to the general population. So we're basically, if you have a mental illness and you don't have a mental illness, that's the same.
Dr. Gabert says the best thing you can do to reduce stigma is to talk to people with mental illness.
We need to look at people with lived experience. So what does that mean? Somebody that has already suffered mental illness and been treated for mental illness to talk about what it was like for them.
So Crisis Intervention Team, CIT, started in Memphis over 30 years ago. There was an African American man who was shot and killed during a mental health crisis. And at that time there was a big stir up. A lot of people in the community were outraged. But NAMI family members went to the Memphis Police Department and said, how can we help? And what they did was they decided to start education programs for officers. And now we call it, a shortcut is help, not handcuffs. You know, really, that's where it started from, and that we want to educate officers to be able to identify, is this a mental health crisis or are they criminal? Right? Are they being dangerous, or are they just yelling into the air, not really hurting anyone? So they need to figure out how to identify a crisis and then how to de-escalate. And within that training, these officers, we have now over 180 trained in Honolulu. So they're changing how we help our community members. But not only that, as part of the education, we're training our officers on self-care. And what we're teaching the officers is you cannot de-escalate unless you yourself are in a good state of mind, right?
When we tell people not to do something, they kind of do it. So let's tell them what we want you to do. We want you to connect with people. We want you to ask and be concerned about people's well-being, right? And we want you to give them the time to hear their stories. When you really ask someone, how are you? Mean, how are you? And give them the time and space to talk about how they're doing. Everyone, it doesn't matter, mental illness, no mental illness, we all just want to be heard.
So if corporate leaders can share their story, if police officers can share their story, if moms and dads, keiki, teens, grandmas, all of us share our stories, then they go, oh, if you struggled and you are someone I respect, maybe it's okay if I go and get help. Mental illness and physical illness are not two separate things. It's the same. They both need treatment, they both need medication, they both need intervention, and it's okay, we should normalize both.
Advocates hope more people will do more to stop their suffering and seek help. Here's some advice they have for those struggling with mental health issues.
Hang in there. The road is rough, but there is another side, and you just gotta keep going.
Mental illness does not define you. You are not just a mental illness. You are important and you belong in this world.
I think now is the time to kind of pull back the curtains and say, no shame, let's talk about it, let's malama, let's take care of each other, right?
We want to say it's okay.
It's okay to not be okay.
It's okay to go through struggle.
It's okay to not be okay, and I didn't know that, but a lot of people really need to hear that.
While stigma surrounding mental health has greatly reduced over the years, many advocates say more work needs to be done to end the silence and bring people hope. So, here's what you can do to break the stigma. Get treatment. Don't isolate yourself. Join a support group. Educate yourself and others about mental health. Choose empowerment over shame. Don't equate yourself with your illness. And most importantly, talk openly about mental health and speak out against stigma. If you or anyone you know is thinking about suicide or just need emotional support, call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.